Hello and welcome to another video tutorial. So in this video we'll be looking at working with the Radar Builder, and as you can see I'm using Pro Radar Builder. And if you're using 2D Radar Builder, then you'll only see the Create 2D System button here. If you're using 3D Radar Builder, then you'll only see the Create 3D System button. Since Pro Radar Builder is a combination of both 2D Radar Builder and 3D Radar Builder, then you can follow along with this. So to open the window, again, you'd go to Tools, Diamond, go on Pro Radar Builder, or in your case, 2D Radar Builder or 3D Radar Builder. If I want to create a 2D system, I click the Create 2D button, and there's an email address here. If you want to send an email, you just copy that out and send an email. So I'm just going to click the Create 2D System here, and there we go. We've now created our 2D system. Now, one of the questions I get asked a lot is if you can design the system to look however you want, and the answer is yes. It's just made up of sprites here, so we can switch out the sprites, and we can have as many sprites as we want, and we can position the sprites however we want to. All right, we can actually just go ahead and run the scene now. And there you go, our system's now in place. And what we could do at this point is I can show you some of the design settings. So whenever you create a radar system from the editor, you get thrown into the Designs tab here, and you'll find your camera settings, scale settings, position settings, and the rotation targets settings here. Under camera settings, if you open that out, we see that we have a use camera with tag, and it's the set the main camera, and we have rendering camera set to this render camera. Whenever you create a 2D, whenever you create any radar builder, you get a render camera. Now the render camera is used when you're working in screen space, and the 2D radar's default screen space, so it gives us a render camera and assigns it automatically. Now, the reason why it requires another camera here, which is referenced to the main camera, we can select, if our camera had a different tag, we select a different tag. Or you can use a manual camera setup and just drag in a camera. All right. Now, the reason why this is required is because we need to be able to reference, well, we need the render camera to be fed the position, the rotation values of the main camera. So if we grab the main camera here and we rotate it, we want our radar to match that rotation and remain where it is, just like that. All right. Now, the next thing that we'd want to do, set that back. Next thing we want to do here is take a look at what our scale settings are. So we have a value here called use local scale. If we turn that on, then that means that we can actually grab the radar itself and rescale it. If we turn it off, we'll have to rescale with the radar diameter value here. Let's just go ahead and set that back to 1. Just use local scale. Now we have a scene scale value here, and this determines how much the radar can actually see, and we'll look at this more when we start tracking objects. We have an inner culling zone, which you will not see in the game view, but you'll see it in the scene view here. So let's zoom down. So anything that's in this inner culling zone, if a blip enters this zone, it will be culled. So let's set that back to 0. And for tracking bounds here, anything that exits the tracking bounds will be culled. So the further away your tracking bounds is, the more objects, more blips you'll see inside. And it all depends on what your settings are. All right, so let's set that back to 1, which means 100% of the area. Now in positioning, we can snap to various positions of the screen. Our default position setting is snap. You can use custom custom positioning, which means that you would actually use your own script to position the radar however you want to position it. But it's better to use the default snap settings here, or you can use manual, which would mean that you set the X and Y position here in the editor, which is a far less flexible system. So go back to snap. We can snap to 9 different points on the screen. Usually snap to the bottom left. And you can change the front facing direction of the radar. Now, in order to see a lot of this stuff in action, we need to actually track blips. So let's exit this. And let's make sure first thing that both these cameras aren't rendering the radar. So let's select the render camera, and let's tell the render camera to only render things that are on the radar UI layer. Let's take off default, and let's put the radar on the radar UI layer. And yes, change children, and let's tell the main camera to not render anything that's on the radar UI layer. And if we run the scene again, you'll see that we have just the radar here. All right, the next thing to do is, let's go ahead and just select that 2D radar here. Actually, just create some empty game objects. We're gonna make three game objects. Let's go to the top view here. One, two, three. And let's change the Y positions also. One up, another down. And let's give these the tag enemy. All right, and now we can move to our blips tab. Now the first blip you see is called the player blip. Let's go ahead and turn that on. Click the power button to the right, turn it on. Now the center object, the thing that's going to reference, be a point of reference for the position of all the other objects in the scene, is going to be your center object, which you'd set up here. If you do not have a center object, so if this is turned off, then your reference point is going to be the radar itself, or your main camera. If your camera is destroyed, then the reference is going to become the radar itself. If you have a center object, for example, your player character that you're tracking, and your character is destroyed, then it's going to switch to using the main camera. If your main camera is also destroyed, then it's going to switch to using the radar itself as a reference point, so that you never actually lose a connection to your center object. All right, anyway, starting off, it's time to actually put some stuff in this and do some tracking. So, player sprite, it has a default sprite here that we're going to use. And all the materials have already been set up for that. Let's go ahead and, yeah, let's just leave that. Let's leave it blank, but let's put this sprite, when the sprite is instanced, we want to put it on the radar UI layer. Yeah, we're just going to leave that there. Actually, I'm just going to create an empty game object and then give it the tag player. Since it's 0 position, that's good. All right. Let's call it the player. And then the next thing I'm going to want to do here, we're not using any prefab blips. Check their additional options. Always show the player in the radar. We could do that, but let's not go into too much detail. You can actually play around with this. I mean, it actually states what the function is already. And if you need more information, then you can go to show help messages, and there it is. You have the information regarding each of the various functions here. So I won't need to go into too much detail for those really minute functions. All right, now rotation and scale. We may need to scale this down because 1 is going to be a bit too large. Let's go ahead and check it. Oh, that's actually perfect. All right, I think that's scale value was 0.23. All right, that's good. And also, yeah, we can track the rotation of our player object here. And we can also track the, we can actually scale by distance. I'm not going to use that right now. So let's increase our blip count to 1 here. And we want to track all of the enemy objects. So we're default sprite here. I'm going to turn that on. And we're going to go ahead and put this on the radar UI layer, and we want to track our enemies. So enemy, and it reads and says create blip as sprite with tag enemy on layer radar UI. So if we check the sprite, there we have our sprite value, and we're going to want to set the rotation scale settings here. So the scale value is going to be equal to 1. But we could do a little something a little bit more fun here. Scale by distance, minimum scale. It's going to be 0.25. Maximum scale is going to be 0.5. Track rotation, single axis, or you can have multi-axis. You can track the rotation of each individual game object that you're tracking. Usually just save it to single axis. You can track the X, Y, or Z. I would just not use track rotation. And let's go ahead and run this. And there we go. Now, if we go back to our designs tab here, and we go to scale, our scene scale value determines how much we can see. So if we increase the scene scale value, then we're zooming out. If we decrease the scene scale value, then we zoom in. And that brings us closer to our blips there. And if we zoom in enough, then what you can see happening is that the blips get clipped, as it should. Now, you'd be wondering, why is this particular blip disappearing right at the end there? It's a good question, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. So if we went ahead and we looked at the tracking bounds, this blip is, if I remember correctly, it's the third one. Yes, this one. And it's the height. So the distance from the center object is still the same on this angle here. The distance is still the same as if the blip were at a 0Y position and placed all the way across here. But because we've added a Y position to it, then it gets clipped sooner. That's exactly how it's supposed to be. And if you want to better visualize this, then what we use is the scale by distance. So let's manipulate these values a little bit more. .1. All right, so the blips that are closer are going to look larger, and the blips that are further away are going to look smaller. So if we go back to our scene scale value here and we begin moving it, you see that this blip becomes smaller faster because it's further away, and then it gets clipped, which is exactly how it's supposed to behave. Now, if you want to try something really awesome and be able to see, kind of visualize a 3D environment in a 2D space, then you'd use a 3D radar as a 2D radar. There's an example scene for that. It's quite interesting. You should take a look at that. Anyway, yeah, so that's how this works. Again, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. There's a lot of videos out there with go into detail on how to actually play around with these settings here. You can do that yourself. I'm just going to show you how to actually get it set up. You can mess around with the values however you want. You won't break anything. All right. Yeah, we've looked through position and we've looked through the blips. Here we go. Optimization. So let's exit. So the optimization option, this is actually quite important. So we can use a recursive optimization or pooling. Pooling is actually quite fast. It's highly recommended. If you know how many game objects you have that you're tracking, then you can set your pooling size. That'd be 3. If you don't know, or you just really don't care about how many objects you're tracking, then just don't set the pooling size. It will do it automatically. Now, if you want, when you're using pooling, you're not supposed to actually destroy your objects. They're disabled. But there's a system in place to handle cases where you accidentally destroy your pooled game objects. But now you have the options here of removing your blip when the tag changes. So if the tag on any of these tracked objects change, then we want to remove them from the pool. Or if you disable any of them, then we want to remove it. And then if it's enabling, we want it back. So you can use those options. And again, for more detail here, just turn on the show help messages. If you go over here, if we just go down to pooling, we see all the information we need. So you basically don't need me to say it all over again. It's just right here. All right, so let's turn off this show help messages here. Go back to blips. Under additional options, always show enemy in the radar. Go ahead and turn that on. Let's just show you how that works. We're not using prefabs. All right, so let's go ahead and run this scene here. And let's go to scale and reduce that. And as you can see here, it gets locked to the bounds there, which is how it should be. One of the things that you can do here, if you don't want this to actually be sticking out, because remember the center of the sprite is, well, the center. So when the center reaches the border, that's when it actually holds it. So what you can do here is set the tracking bounds. Let's go 0.91. Yeah, that's pretty good. 0.91, so that whenever we are actually whenever we're scaling it, we don't actually go outside. We stop right at the edge there. Perfect. So you can see there's a whole lot of things that you can do with this. All right, now the 3D radar builder is exactly the same. There's just a little bit more functions, and inside the 3D radar you can actually not only create sprites or prefab blips, you can actually make mesh blips. Prefab blips are quite flexible, because depending on how you work with the prefab blips, you can make the blips selectable you can have them have particle effects. So we have some examples in the example scenes, which you can check out. So we're finished working with the 2D radar here. I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to delete that 2D radar and delete its render camera. Let's create a 3D system. And this is really exactly the same way, same setup. Except you have the option of using screen space. So let's turn off the render camera here. Let's just change out the sprite so that there's less to look at. And go to blips, increase the blip type to 1. We're not going to use any, I'm just going to turn that off. Actually, just, yeah, switch it back on, it doesn't matter. Let's put it on the radar UI layer. Radar UI layer. And the enemy, yep, there we go, as a sprite. The blip size is going to be huge, but it doesn't matter. We already know how to change the blip size. So there's a huge blips. We can just change those blip sizes, it doesn't matter. But it, again, it's the same exact thing, except this time if we, so I'm just going to try, I'm just going to do it at runtime. Scale value, I'm just going to do scale by distance. Maximum scale is going to be 0.5, minimum scale 0.1. Center object, rotation scale, I'm going to set that to that value. And if you go to our scale settings here and we zoom out, then there. It's quite nice, very simple. One other thing that we can do is you can add our tracking lines to it. So if you go to our blips area here, turn on the tracking line value is automatically set. We can have a base tracker. The base tracker value is automatically set. Let's give it back that scale by distance value. What did we use? 0.1, yeah, and 0.5. We use the same value here. Rotation scale 0.2. All right, if you run this, let's go to designs, scale, let's zoom out, and let's take a look at what we have here. So there we go. And one thing we can do here, if we grab this radar and we hit E to rotate it, we begin rotating it, we see that we get to rotate it. So let's use the local scale, and we can scale it. We can scale it, we can rotate it, we can position it, and it doesn't break it. All while the tracking is being done. All right, so that's how easy it is. Then you can design this really however you want to. So it's quite simple. The only thing, we didn't even have to leave the radar builder interface. We just went between the radar builder, the hierarchy, and the scene view here. So that's how easy it is to work with. You can check out the video on the Minimap. It's actually quite easy to use the Minimap also. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. And if you have any questions, then go to the create tab here and copy this out and send a message, and I'll get back to you. So thanks for watching again, and I'll see you in the next videos.